Begin Self-Publishing, episode 138. Jen finishes her plan.
Interested in self-publishing but don't know where to start? Want to get your book onto Amazon? Want to hold your paperback book in your hands? Learn how on the Begin Self-Publishing podcast with your host, Tim Lewis.
Well, you probably remember that we had Jen Cole on the show quite recently, and she talked about how she was going to write a plan for a book. Well, she's now completed the plan, and in this episode we're going to talk about that. So, with no further ado, let's go over to the interview. Hi Jen, welcome back to the show, and my understanding, well, I know this because I've actually seen it, is that you have completed your plan for the book.
Yeah, hi Tim. I'm happy to be here, and I feeling like it may be completed. I know that there are some things that I'm going to be changing simply because I've come up with better ideas since I, quote, completed my plan, but I think it's still a work in progress, but I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, from a personal level, every single plan that I've ever done has changed while I've been writing the book. The most important thing is to have some kind of idea of the sections and the structure of the book, which is what you get from writing a plan.
Right.
One thing I would say, having looked at your secret plan, which I'm not going to share with the listeners, as I said in the pre-chat, just for on the odd chance that they might write your book for you and rush off.
No, don't do that.
You've got a different way of thinking about these plans than I have. I'm very much bullet points and like, this is the section and quite. Well, you're more like larger sections with paragraphs describing. So you've almost got like an intro to the book at the beginning, and then you've got sections underneath with headings.
Yes, that's true. And the reason I do that is because I know myself, and I know that if I don't elaborate enough, the entire point is going to get completely missed, and I'm going to write a completely different book. It could end up being a completely different book if I don't make sure that I describe the context that I want to be sure to add to that. So that's why I've done that.
You've highlighted a bit in since the last time I saw the plan. I actually, for a little bit of background for the listeners, I was actually in Wichita after going to Digital Book World in Nashville, and I thought, well, it's fairly close to the Midwest. So I went to Kansas City, and then I went to visit you again in Wichita. So I actually sat next to you at a PC and looked at this plan, and then totally forgotten everything about it until now.
I even made an Instagram post so that we could remember that memory forever.
I may, with your permission, steal that photo and use it in some of the artwork for this show. So.
Oh, absolutely. And that's been recorded, so yes, you can.
Okay, so I suppose a little aside, what do you feel in terms of how your book concept has crystallized from doing the plan? I mean, has it been helpful to you to write this plan?
Yes, this has been very helpful. It's kind of like following a path. Like, I've just been doing a lot of hiking out in Colorado, and it's very much like, this is the path. Now, all I have to do is basically create the little detours, the little secret paths that kind of go off the path for the scenic views, and then come back on for the main point, and then create an entire experience based off of this path that I've created.
And has there been anything about the book that you thought initially, oh, I'm going to do this, but then in trying to think about it in the plan, you thought, you don't want to go down that particular alleyway, so to speak?
There's one that I'm definitely teetering on, but I do feel like it's really important to leave in, though. So I think that what I'm going to need to do is really consider the angle on that piece and make sure that it is clearly tying back to the theme of the rest of the book in the way that it needs to be relevant.
I like the way that you've got sort of a testimonial, and it's mainly the only person is me you've got on it at the moment.
Yeah, I plan on having a few of those for each section. I want to have at least a testimonial or a case study.
Yeah, I think that's worthwhile. One thing I would say that I've learned from my social media networking book, which clearly you're in as well, is that this is something that will it makes sense closer to the book release time. But I think you might want to look at sort of eventually setting up some sort of email list or some sort of subscription thing where you can give people who are testimonial or involved in the book a way to kind of get their followers interested in your book.
I love it.
I mean, one thing that I noticed with my book release was that even though I got like you and various other people to share the book on social media and talk about it, the trouble with social media is you just don't get that kind of hit of like everybody buying the book at the same time that you would with an email list. So that's something you might want to consider setting up a sort of, or even you could even set up a Facebook community or something sort of like.
Oh, I like that idea.
Well, the problem is that the Facebook community is a bit more work to keep going than an email list. Though I suppose you could argue that if you don't email an email list, then it dies down a little in the same way as if you don't go on a Facebook group, you wouldn't. So that's something you might want to consider as a sort of a background thing. So that the Friends of Jen's book email list might be a good idea to start thinking about in the next month or so.
Okay, cool.
In terms of the next stages, so you've kind of got your plan now and it's kind of almost there. You've got a good idea about the book. What I would suggest, and I know enough about your kind of schedule to know that this might be harder in some ways than in other ways, but is looking for some period of time, like a few days maybe, or ideally a week or something like that, where you can really concentrate on trying to write the book as fast as possible.
Okay.
And that could be, I mean, potentially, I mean, your plan has got sections in it. It could be just taking one of those sections and then that's, you got a day off or something along those lines and trying to write that section in that day.
Love it.
The way to do it is almost to be not sitting there with a bottle of wine thinking like, yeah, great, we're going to write this. But literally, you don't worry about mistakes and you don't worry about, you have to disengage your whole editor persona.
Oh, that is so difficult for me. But yeah, I understand what you're saying.
I've gone the other extreme now. Like a lot of the time, I will be able to write stuff really quickly, but I'm not going back and editing it. And then I'm like, oh, can I be bothered to go back and edit it? And it's like, and then you just see like huge amounts of typos. And I'm like,
I know.
But that is actually, for a first draft of a book, that is a fantastic skill to have. So,
okay.
I mean, obviously, if you see you misspell a word, and you can go back and change it. But what you don't want to be doing is kind of writing. So then I went to Wichita and I found an amazing community. And then you think, oh, do I want to say community or do I want to say group? And then you end up, no, I don't like that. And you go back and you change it.
Right.
Just write it straight through and don't worry about like phraseology or maybe you said the right thing. That's where the plan comes in useful, because if you do that approach and you haven't got a plan, then you're probably going to end up a sort of, up an alleyway in Colorado where there isn't a troll at the end. Let's say that.
Right. Of course. That steals phones.
Yeah. You'll just be on the wrong path. But because you've got a plan, which in your case is basically sections with like a description of what is underneath it. So if you make sure that you read through those descriptions a couple of times before you start, so it's fresh in your mind what you're trying to write, and then literally spend a day or two or whatever time you can get out and just try and write that section as fast as possible. So that's the kind of the next step. And once you get to the end, I mean, you've got two options, I suppose. I mean, I always try and write the book all in one go and then start the editing process when I've finished, because there is something amazing about having a finished first draft.
Yeah.
You almost get to the thing where you think, I've got this book, I just need to finish it now.
Awesome.
But if you don't have that, like, first draft finish, then it ends up as this half-finished document on your hard drive.
Exactly.
I've still got, like, sci-fi novels and things that I wrote when I was in my 20s and early 30s where I didn't have a plan, I'd never finished it, and it's meandered off and it's gone off to some kind of, like, little... And then I've just given up on it. But if you manage to do it so that you finish each section off, then you've got an initial draft, and that is not going to be publishable. And that's where you start the editorial process. And the first sort of editorial run through, which if you've got the resources, and I would recommend if you can, getting somebody else to edit the book.
Right. Okay.
Well, actually, I'd say the very first editorial run will be you.
Right.
Because you are then going through saying like, well, I don't like the sound of that. You'll have a much better kind of grasp of the project, and you will be committed to it because you've already got this completed book that just needs to be edited. The fact the editing process can take almost as long as the writing process it is by the by. But that's kind of the next step, I would guess, in terms of your process. So I would be looking to see, I suppose what you could do is just pick one of the sections, which you think is about average length, and then maybe take a day off or a couple of days off somewhere, or 2 days when you're not that busy. I mean, I know you're in social media marketing, and it's kind of like you've got a flexible job, but you're kind of working all the time.
Right. That's exactly right.
In a weird kind of way.
Yeah.
So maybe a day where you've got like just 1 or 2 things, like you've got Twitter chat to do, but you've got nothing else to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then just spend the morning, afternoon, and see how far you get. Because if you find you can do one of these sections in a day, then that makes it kind of like easy. That probably, depending on your typing speed, that might be too ambitious. But we won't know until we try.
Exactly.
You might want to say like picking building loyalty section or something like that, and then just go and try and just write it as fast as possible.
Okay.
So not quite free writing. I'm not saying like you go sort of totally sort of hippie, like first thing that comes into your head. It has to be about you're writing a longer version of what your plan is.
Awesome.
Which is why it's important that you go back and you look at it. I mean, you could plan out within the sections, which is kind of what I do. But then you can go like almost ad infinitum further and further down if you want to. And it's like, well, how far do you go? Right. The main approach is to find something that works for you. But this is what I would suggest. Because otherwise you can end up in this dreadful rewriting. And then you get fed up with rewriting and you look at it and you've only got like 1 paragraph.
We can't have that. That's
Yeah.
too much time to spend.
Yeah, you're better to have like a almost complete, almost right, maybe with faults in it, maybe things you can change. But then it's easier to go back and change it because you've got that already. So that's kind of the approach I would look to start doing. So this is the kind of the next phase in your project is actually getting these chapters written. Now, can I talk to you about software?
Yes, please. Let's talk about that.
So, what are you planning to write this in? Are you going to use Microsoft Word, or have you got any other software you use, or use Google Docs or something like that?
Right, I was just going to continue using Google Docs, just create a new doc and have the plan as the plan, and then create a brand new doc for the actual book itself.
Okay. Well, I mean, I use something called Scrivener myself, but you could kind of achieve the same thing in Google Docs. What I would almost suggest is rather than having one Google Doc for the whole document, have one for each section.
Okay.
And then combine them all at the end.
Cool.
I don't know what, I mean, it may be just me that has this psychological thing, but I feel having sectioned kind of documents, which is the way that Scrivener works.
I see.
It just makes it easier for me to kind of see, because otherwise, for a start, you're scrolling up and down all the time a lot to get to the right section.
Right. Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. That's so true.
Yeah. And it also means that you're going to, when you're thinking, it's less intimidating a smaller document than a bigger one.
Absolutely.
So the smaller you can make things, the better. I mean, I don't think there's an awful lot of crossover between the sections in your book. They are talking about similar themes, but I don't think you're not going to be referencing each other massively, are they, particularly?
Yeah, I don't feel like it. And what I like about this thought about creating a doc for each section is it kind of breaks down the task a little bit to where it's more foreseeable to get done. if they're in separate docs, is kind of like a separate project. So I get this section done, it's done. Then I get this section done, it's done. And then before you know it, it's like it's all done. That'll be wonderful. So I love that idea to break it down into different docs for different sections. So that makes it just seems more attainable that way in the big scheme of things.
Oh, yeah. Well, that, again, is something that made a big difference to me in terms of actually finishing a book.
Right.
Because I had this software where it was all automatically in sections and you can move it around and the rest of it. But you can do the same with just separate Google Docs for each section.
Right.
What else? Oh, I did actually ask you a question at the end of the last show, which I've forgotten about, which was to make a note of any self-publishing questions you had. Now, given that you just rushed into the office like 30 seconds before you did on this interview, you may not have dreadfully much idea of what those questions were. But has there been anything that has basically leaped out to you that you're worried about in the self-publishing process since you've started this journey?
Oh gosh, I think that really, besides the writing, which I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on how to get that done now, I actually feel like a little less intimidated by the entire thing, because this is something that I've always wanted to do, but now to actually do it is a completely different animal. So, but to have that so attainable in my brain now is wonderful. But then, so my next thing is I'm already jumping ahead to like materials and covers and, and the title that I cannot commit to and all of those kinds of things that I'm just like, okay, so if I can't even commit to a title, is this book ever even going to really happen? Because it's kind of like writing an entire letter, getting it addressed, putting the stamp on it and just never putting it in the mail. I've done that a million times. And so I just don't want that to be I don't want the title hang up to be my thing. And I imagine it'll probably come to me after during the writing of the book or something like that. But I'm being very impatient with the title of the book, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with my social media networking book, I think for a long time it was called The Real Social Advantage, which in some ways is a better title, but I changed it to social media networking just because that's what the book is about.
Right. Yeah. Straight into the point.
And yeah, I mean, I think I went through about 3 other titles as well. Whether people would say social media networking is a great title, don't know. But it does exactly what it says on the tin, to use a British expression. It's kind of like, it's direct and it makes sense. So, and I'm sure actually a title will come through from your process of writing the book, because often with my books, you have a working title at the beginning.
Right.
But then your book goes in a different direction. And this is another thing that I would say. Now, your plan has kind of description. So this probably isn't such a big issue for you. But for me, certainly from the fiction side, I have always thought that if there's a question between I think of something great to put in the book and it's not in the plan, I will put it in the book. And then I change the plan to fit the book. The plan, it shouldn't be a dictatorial thing that you have to stick to the plan because you've got the plan. If you have you think, well, that would be a really great idea and that fits into the book, don't be afraid to change the plan and the book. But on the other hand, don't just totally ignore the plan.
Definitely. No way. No.
Yeah.
I think this is a great starting point, I believe.
Yeah. The plan is your sort of master document for the book project, but you are the custodian and you are the plan's boss. So don't let the plan boss you about, but realize that plan is a formulation of a lot of effort that you thought, and it's your own consideration as to what that book should be about. So don't dismiss it totally and think like, well, I'm bored with the plan, because I was thinking something else. You've spent a lot of time and effort in that plan. So do follow it. But if you suddenly have a good idea, then certainly run with it. Right. Certainly within the sections. So that's kind of be liberal, but don't be like, think you have to slavishly go in the plan if you think you can create a better book without it, without going slightly off piste. But it is like the trails example.
Right.
If you see like there's a little pathway off and it's going to give you a better view and it rejoins the main path, then by all means take that path. But if it's basically down the hillside.
Absolutely.
And into some sort of dangerous ravine, then you probably don't want to be wandering off down there.
No. Yes, that's an excellent point. I love that you said that.
Okay, so have you got any other self-publishing questions, or shall we just arrange to talk again at some point, hopefully when you've started writing the book?
Yeah, I think that any other questions, I think we can get to materials and all that kind of stuff in the coming episodes, for sure, because right now I think the focus is just going to be getting this thing written, and I really want to get started doing that. So I think that should be the focus right now.
Okay. Well, given the cadence of the shows, and hopefully I'll be able to get Ben and May King on to find out how they're doing, it'll be 6 weeks before I talk to you again.
Well, holy moly.
I'll expect some kind of... I'm trying to think, when the hell is 6 weeks away?
I know it's getting close to Christmas.
Yeah, it's going to be sometime around Christmas. So obviously you'll have to totally abandon Christmas and just focus on the book.
Apparently, yeah.
Yes, you won't be able to do anything else but the book until you get it done. So no pressure.
Of course, no pressure at all.
Well, it was great to talk to you again.
Yeah, it was so wonderful to talk to you too. Tim, thank you so much for your guidance, and I really look forward to seeing where we're at the next time I can be on the podcast.
Yes, so onwards and upwards.
Yes, indeed.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please stop by iTunes and rate and leave a review. This helps make the show more visible. For free resources, show notes, and other helpful content, join the community at beginselfpublishing.com.